Good afternoon. Welcome to the Meristem Minute. Today we have Brian Haschemeyer from the BRANDT team here to talk to us about the value of zinc. You know, we really think of zinc as the most important micronutrient in the corn growing system. So really want to highlight and touch on the value that zinc brings and when and how to use it. So Brian, take it away.
Thanks. Thanks, Melanie. Thanks for having me. Hi, guys. I want to talk about zinc a little bit. Zinc is one of my favorite micronutrients to talk about, so happy to do this. So zinc is the #1 micronutrient deficiency on corn, corn also is a crop that is very responsive to zinc applications. It can be used a lot of different ways, obviously managing deficiencies, but it can also be used as a tool when you think about high yield environments. So depends on where you are, but let's talk a little bit about zinc. Guys think about zinc, they think about root growth, early vigor, right? Corn getting out of the ground better, taller, things like that. And the primary reason for that is zinc is important for auxin production. So a couple of the metabolites that it takes to make IAA, the primary auxin that zinc helps with, you need zinc to make the precursor. So when zinc levels dip down low, it tends to affect auxin levels. And when you do that, it affects root growth and early vigor and height of corn. So there's that. The other big one is actually in the assimilation of proteins and enzymes. Enzymes is a big structure or big family that involves all sorts of biological processes in the plant. Then obviously protein assimilation is important too. So within that, there are a few things like, for example, chlorophyll production. You need zinc to make chlorophyll where it's not directly involved in photosynthesis. You need it to actually make the chlorophyll that is. It's also important for sugar to starch accumulation. So a lot of the factors that are growth parameters within the corn, whether it's enzymes or auxins, zinc is involved in. So it's super important. And so keeping those levels high is really important. The other thing, if we want to think about it from a soil test level, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say discrepancy, but there's a lack of a solid number that says this is deficient. But typically, a lot of guys are saying less than 1.5 parts per million zinc is deficient in the soil using the Malek test version. It can vary depending on region and soil pHs. So, but that's 1.5 is a critical number. As the phosphate levels increase in soil, often the zinc needs increase in soil. So a good way to think about that a little bit is you'd like to keep that zinc to phosphate ratio somewhere between 15:1 to 10:1. So if that phosphate level goes up, your zinc levels are going to go up. From a tissue test point of view, we're looking at where do we want those levels. I like them on the early vegetative stage. We're looking at V6 whole plant before that. I like them higher than most people. A lot of the publications are going to tell you 20 to 70 parts per million. I like to see it more like 40 and 50 parts per million and above. Not to say you couldn't grow corn below that well, but if you're above, it helps you tolerate a lot of potential pitfalls, things like drought, rapid growth, transient nutrient deficiencies. And corn can tolerate those higher levels, and it really sets you up to really perform pretty well. If we look at tissue test levels later, a lot of times they're lower when you get up in the VT range, 25 to 70 parts per million. So another big thing to really think about is really the tissue test levels to correlation. I'd like to have phosphate to zinc somewhere in that 150:1 range there. So anyway, there's a lot to think about from a soil factors, high pH soils, that'll create zinc that's not as available. Cold, wet conditions in the spring, that will make zinc not available. So if we think about that, there's a lot of things you can do from a zinc aspect.
So Brian, when you talk about zinc in the soil, what is your product recommendation? What's your application method that you see guys using? How much? What's the rate look like? Talk us through that.
Yeah, good question. I think it depends on what type of equipment you have. So if you have liquid on your planter, which is the guys that are typically in the Southeast and the Western Corn Belt, zinc EDTA 9% is a great product. And put that with your starter fertilizer. Typical rates are 1 to 2 quarts per acre rate. Very effective to do that. There's a lot of zinc EDTA chelated stuff with technology built into, but if you can get that liquid near the seed, that precision placement is always useful. Now, as you know, and I know, and a lot of the growers know, they don't have liquid on their planters, right? And I get it. But having said that, particularly in the last couple of years with the planter box options, and I know Meristem has some great planter box options. Anytime you get zinc placed directly on the seed, that's probably the most efficient zinc you're going to get placed out there. So we found, even though we're putting a lot less zinc out in the trials that we've done, that actually is a very efficient way to get zinc, at least in terms of that early vigor, the germination, and get the corn out of the ground early and get that good start. That's a great way to put it out. So definitely, if you don't have a liquid system, think about some of the planter box options. If you have liquid, a lot of the chelated zincs are a great option. So,
Brian, I also heard you say, the soil is a great setup, but at a certain time, you're going through rapid growth in that corn plant. And so potentially the soil and the root system can't supply enough zinc to that plant. And so some supplemental zinc is needed through those foliar applications. So talk to us a little bit about that.
So foliar zinc's great on corn. Zinc's very responsive to corn. Or corn's really responsive to zinc. But so probably the key timing, I think, is that V4 up to V8 timing. A lot of guys are doing the V4 to V6 timing. That's right before that rapid growth period. And it's good to load that zinc early in the crop. And so any foliar zinc that you can put out, for most of guys, they're pairing the zinc with a herbicide application spray. And I know Meristem's got some great options that work with those sprays. So that, to me, that's a great timing. It's probably one of the most adopted timings for a lot of the Midwest growers, and a very effective timing.
Now, you have some more information where you've talked about that pairing of phosphorus and zinc and what those ratios look like and how they need to be paired. And I know in the past that you and I've talked about, even for guys specifically that want to drive extra high yield, even that third zinc application.
Yeah.
But really needing to have that phosphorus level there. So share with us what that potentially could look like, especially as we're needing to drive for higher yields as corn price is plummeting a bit right now. And so how do we push?
So we've had pretty good success with late season applications, but there are some parameters for success, right? So one of those parameters is, what is your tissue test levels at? So if you are less than 25 parts per million at the VT to R1, taking the ear leaf sample, you have a decent chance of having a pretty good response to a foliar or aerial application, usually in that case. The other caveat to that is having proper NPK sulfur nutrition to go with it, right? If you're going to drive yields, you got to have the other big core NPK nutrients there to do that. So we often pivot off the tissue test levels and the phosphate and the NPK sulfur levels as well. So if you have low zinc and you have fairly adequate or good nutrition and good plant health late, it's a pretty good application to make, and you have a high likelihood of having success from aerial application of doing that. Now, if you don't, obviously then you might be throwing money at bad there, but there is some pretty good parameters to do that. Look at your zinc levels, less than 25 parts per million, and then look at your NPK levels. And if they're adequate, then I would say it's a good application and go ahead and make it. We often do that, just bundle it with a fungicide. It's pretty easy to do.
So Brian, is there anything else you really want to cover as far as that phosphorus and zinc ratio?
Yeah, so I get asked all the time about making zinc applications and whether they're going to be effective or not. And we've run a lot of trials over the years to do that. And we've had great success with our zinc nutrition trials, but we also have really good understanding of when to do that. So phosphate levels, if they're low, and you're making and trying to push zinc levels, it's not going to do a whole lot of good. And with most micronutrients, that's the case. They are supplemental to the base fertility. So if the base fertility is there, the micronutrients are often quite beneficial. Having said that, if you're below the critical levels, it's always a good time to do it. But I get asked a lot about pushing yields, driving yields, and I always pivot the guys to look at zinc based the phosphate. So look at those ratios. If you have questions about the ratios, I don't mind asking or answering them on the side here. But that's where you got to pivot. Look at your zinc to phosphate ratios, see if they're low. If they are low, bring them up. Make sure your nitrogen, your K, your sulfur, and all are up too, and you'll have good success with it.
So there you have it. Thank you, Brian Haschemeyer. Really talking about the value of zinc in the soil, but then with some foliar applications. And so some key products that match what Brian talked about is your zinc 9%, your Revline hopper throttles with your dry zinc component, and then home stretch and harvest shield complete. So thank you for your time, Brian.
Thanks for having me.